inspiring.
My Izmir is happy.
My Izmir is a candidate for Expo 2020.
Will you join us?
Expo 2020 Izmir. New routes to a better world. Health for all.
Good morning. Please take your seats. Dear colleagues, please. We are starting our works today. Please take your seats. We must start now. I need conditions to start the meeting. Please. I call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Question to order. May I remind colleagues that the election of the committee officers for the 23rd annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session. Nominations for candidates for election should be handed into the table office no later than the start of that session, currently scheduled to 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Before we begin, I can ask anyone speaking from a prepared text to end that text to Secretariat in advance. Helping the interpreters in this way will make our meeting more productive and effective. Could I ask the colleagues switch off their mobile phones? It's very important because the signal interferes with the interpretation equipment. Everyone have the mobile phone switch off? Okay. This session of committee will close at 1:30 p.m. The committee is scheduled to have 4 meetings during the session, and our draft agenda for today has been circulated. The agenda starts with considerations of the report and draft resolution of this year annual session, Helsinki 40. There are 51 proposed amendments to the draft resolution. This committee has been tasked by the Standing Committee to debate and consider 5 supplementary items covering the following issues: strengthening the civil society institutions in the OSCE region, sponsored by Mr. Guliev from Azerbaijan; Belarus, sponsored by Mr. Holm from Sweden; citizenship issues, sponsored by Mr. Kovalev, Russian Federation; promoting freedom of belief on the OSCE region, sponsored by Mr. Ellison from Canada; and strengthening the role of education in combating racism, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance and discrimination, sponsored by Mr. Bostansi from Turkey. We have 13 amendments have been proposed to these supplementary items. The committee will start to consider these tomorrow after consideration of the report and draft resolution. I therefore propose that draft agenda for this afternoon's meeting be adopted. Are there any objections? Yes, I give you the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je me permets d'intervenir dans le cadre de l'ordre des travaux, car je m'étonne que lors de la commission permanente, il y ait eu une décision, non pas une décision particulière concernant ma résolution, mais une décision de ne pas pouvoir aborder une thématique dans cette commission, qui est une commission aux droits de l'homme, et une thématique qui concerne particulièrement la question des droits de l'homme en matière d'orientation sexuelle et d'identité de genre. Et donc, il me semble que la commission permanente a outrepassé ses compétences, c'est-à-dire que nous avons des procédures de recevabilité, de résolution qui sont extrêmement, je dirais presque rigides, et que nous avons eu cette fois en commission permanente une attitude qui a été de ne pas prendre en considération un débat qui me semble un débat important, qui est la question de la discrimination réalisée à l'égard des personnes qui ont des orientations sexuelles différentes. Et donc, je voulais absolument vous faire part de cette situation et j'espère qu'à l'avenir, nous aurons la possibilité au sein de cette commission de pouvoir aborder cette thématique. Merci.
I listen to what you say, I agree, but it's a decision of the standing committee and the procedure that don't allow me to do anything more. And now we are, if anyone, we don't have anything.
There's no more objections.
No more objections? No? No more. Okay.
Just to say the agenda is adopted.
The agenda is adopted. Can I say this? Yes, the agenda is adopted. I remind delegates we wish to speak in debates on the draft resolutions to give their names to the committee's secretary as early in each debate as possible. The committee will now hear the presentation of the report on Helsinki 40 by our reporter Anne Fallon from Ireland. General debate on the report and draft resolution will then follow. The time available for each member to speak will necessarily be limited. It would assist me greatly if any member wishing to speak during debate could let Anna Chernova of the Secretariat know as early as debate as possible. Please consider whether your points could be made during debate on the amendments to the draft resolution rather than during general debate itself. After general debate, I will move on the amendments. I call upon the reporter, Mrs. Anne Fallon, to present the report. You have the floor.
And good morning, delegates. My name is Anne Phelan. I'm from Ireland. I am very happy to present this report this morning to you. The report itself is very detailed and it covers a wide variety of issues that affect us in the third dimension. In a way, I suppose, all of the other committees of the OSCE tend to feed into this third dimension, which deals with human issues. In a way, it is not very easy for us all to fit what are human conditions very easily into law. And that are sometimes the difficulties that we face, but we have to strive to make things better.
We don't have conditions in the room to proceed. Please take your seats. Give us conditions, please. You can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I say, it's not intended that I go through the report line by line, but I think the report certainly reflects some of my own opinions, particularly with a huge interest in human trafficking and all forms of exploitation, including exploitation which affects women and children very, very badly in a number of areas. As part of the Helsinki Plus 40 process, the spirit of this agreement should be renewed and the progress since 1975 should be measured in the third dimension. We should bear in mind the Irish Chairperson in Office closing statement of the 2012 Ministerial Council. Of even greater concern is the sad reality that respect for basic human rights and fundamental freedoms is currently under great threat in many parts of the OSCE region. Not only are the basic rights and freedoms not always respected, but new challenges have emerged in the last 40 years. Questions can be raised on whether new laws are improving the human rights situation for people across the OSCE area regarding human trafficking, freedom of the media and internet, freedom of belief, anti-terrorism laws, the right to peaceful protest, and among others. During this period of economic crisis, workers are faced with increased job insecurity, and noting that austerity measures may further endanger their rights, participating states all have their strengths and weaknesses, but with increasing interdependence. Violations in one country can now have an impact on the wider OSCE area. In the area of human trafficking, the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has regularly debated this burning issue. Last July in Monaco, the Parliamentary Assembly voted on the resolution on gender and minorities in the OSCE region, which reminds that in our countries, minority women and men are more vulnerable to trafficking for sexual exploitation. And I believe myself that education of vulnerable people has a huge role to play in all of this. And I would like to thank the OSCE for their field missions who are trying to do some very good work on regional and local level on raising the awareness about trafficking and trafficking for sexual exploitation. It is working with a number of rural women across some of the states to raise this awareness, because we find that education plays a vital role in this. I remember in Ireland about 2 years ago there was a case of a Romanian child who was not necessarily trafficked into Ireland for sexual exploitation, but was lured by the promise of a better life. The girl herself was only 18 years old. She unfortunately fell into the trap of some very, very unsavoury people who were mixed up in drugs, and they were gangland. They held the girl and they tortured her over 3 days. They raped and they abused her in the most horrific ways. The girl herself had a mobile phone, but unfortunately, because, and I like to call her a child, was illiterate, she couldn't make a phone call which could have saved her life. I like to think that in that case, and I have to praise the Irish authorities for following up on the case and keeping the case on the agenda, I like to think that in that case, all that case encompasses all human rights abuses. The girl was uneducated, was not able to do anything for herself except make a life on a street in a very unsavoury way. And this is where a lot of our people end up. So trafficking is something that the OSCE has to step up to. We have to operate across borders. We have to establish our databases. We have to use good communications, and we have to work with NGOs and all of the security people that we have to work with as well. We have to, trafficking in human beings and addressing the special needs of child victims. Much work remains to be done to tackle all forms of trafficking. We need to further promote law enforcement for better prosecution, strengthen measures for the prevention, the protection and the integration of victims. The Ministerial Council adopted strong declarations on this issue, such as the Ministerial Declaration on combating forms of human trafficking on the 7th of December 2011, that declared that human trafficking is a grave and heinous crime that violates human dignity, undermines human rights and fundamental freedoms, and that feeds organised criminal networks. Okay, we will move on to promotion of freedom of the media. The 1975 Helsinki Final Act refers to Article 19 of the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everybody has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Unfortunately, this right has been and continues to be violated in several countries in the OSCE area. The role of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media is fundamental, as is the work of the OSCE field missions. Dunja Mijatovic is visiting participating states and working with them on possible improvements in the field of media freedom. She calls on the participating states to reverse a culture of impunity that exists in some participating states and to avoid the adoption of new laws limiting the access to information and the rights of journalists. And if we are to be truly call ourselves parliamentarians and diplomats, freedom of the media is certainly one of the cornerstones of democracy. Freedom of the media and allow journalists to go and do their very good work, holding governments to account. This is what their job is. I know that sometimes it may be embarrassing for the administration that is in office, and indeed sometimes it may be embarrassing for the previous administration, but we have to allow journalists to do the job that they do very well, and that is holding a society and governments to account. We perhaps have a situation in Ireland at the moment that is perhaps embarrassing as well, where due to the banking crisis, there is the journalists and the media is very much reporting on tapes that have been released on our banking crisis, which I know that some people are finding very uncomfortable, and it's very embarrassing. But the journalists have to do a good job, and indeed the public have a right to know what went on. So defending freedom of the press should be a priority for OSCE states. From there we move on to freedom of belief, and it is significant that we are here in Turkey, as in Istanbul, as perhaps you are one of the most tolerant of religious beliefs. I believe that your 13th century theologian Rumi, known as Mevlana, and forgive it if I haven't mentioned the pronunciation correctly, perhaps we don't need to all become whirling dervishes to achieve a state of loving and being of service to the whole of creation without discrimination with regard to creed, race, class or nation. And I think that is what the OSCE is perhaps hoping to achieve. The United Nations Universal Declaration also states that everybody has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. According to the Helsinki Final Act, the participating states will recognise and respect the freedom of the individual to profess and practice, alone or in community with others, religion or belief acting in accordance with the diktats of his or her own conscience. Parliamentary transparency and openness, and I would like to think that this is also a cornerstone for the OSCE states as well, and it is an area in which we would like to say that there is a standard all across the OSCE. I can highlight the Declaration on Parliamentary Openness, a product of the 2012 World e-Parliament Conference, as one approach to improve legislative transparency, expand access to parliamentary information, enable electronic communication among elected officials and constituents, and increase citizen engagement. The very important operation of field presence mandates. Last July, the OSCE PA urged once again that the OSCE Ministerial Council to adopt full, effective and long-term, at least 3-year mandates that include monitoring and reporting activities in all spheres, including the areas of human rights and the human dimension. In December 2012, the Permanent Council decided to extend the mandate to all field missions until December 2013. The role of civil society and the OSCE, and again, as we call ourselves parliamentarians and diplomats, we have to recognise the hugely important role of civil society in conjunction with the OSCE. The OSCE's human dimensions reform is moving along, but the lack of progress regarding the participation of the civil society in the decision-making process is missing from the agenda. Several proposals have been made by non-governmental organisations and coalitions, such as the Civic Solidarity Platform. In 2012 Monaco Declaration, the Assembly called for a civil society advisory board within the OSCE PA. While this issue remains on the table, civil society has been present in recent OSCE PA meetings, including the winter meetings. Prison conditions and oversight. Last year's report by the rapporteur of this committee, Mr. Cruz from the Netherlands, focused on prison reforms. Carews, and his report was very detailed. Carews noticed that the OSCE has not developed binding standards in the field of prison conditions, and the systematic inspection of prisons is still very limited. So I believe there is possibly much work for the OSCE to do there. Another area that my report focused on was access to justice, and not just access to justice for certain people or wealthy people, but access to justice for all, because I believe that any state where the lowest or the least endowed citizen can access justice, this is what we have to strive to achieve. In Monaco, this committee also emphasised the issue of judicial independence. In some participating states, the lack of access to a fair trial has been highlighted. As stated in the 1990 Copenhagen document, all human beings should have access to a fair trial and tribunal, which also applies to political activists and those accused of terrorist activities. Refugees and internally displaced persons, this is now becoming a very, very real issue in the world at the moment, particularly with the Syrian crisis. I believe the situation is moving out of all proportions, and an area in which we are trying to deal with here in Turkey as well. It's a particular issue, but it is a particular issue for us all. And I suppose we would like to believe when people are subjected to the sometimes very, very bad conditions which they have to live with as refugees, I think one thing that really should exercise our minds is that when we have children in these situations and they grow up to be adults, those conditions are what they remember. So that I think we need to think about the type of people that will grow up into adults out of these refugee situations. I think that is somewhere that we need to do a lot of work. In all OSCE participating states, refugees and internally displaced persons' rights should be respected, including the right to return. Education, work and healthcare and access to justice are all desirables if you are a refugee. So perhaps I will just go to the conclusions. The Helsinki Plus 40 process is not fully defined at the moment. Therefore, the role of the OSCE PA is also to bring its contribution in order to make it as useful as possible. We have seen some very significant progress in the human dimension since 1975, in particular the adoption of the 1990 Copenhagen document, which is still held up as the key document when evaluating the quality of elections in participating states. However, in some participating states, the situation of specific human rights and fundamental freedoms has regressed. To combat human trafficking, origin, transit and destination countries need to work together to adopt strong policies and to reinforce the education and awareness on this topic so that the most vulnerable can be provided with an alternative and thus protect themselves against this threat before it even occurs. Freedom of the media and freedom of belief are also rights that are regularly violated despite recurring calls to respect fundamental commitments, not only through OSCE PA declarations, but also from the OSCE institutions and representatives, international organisations, civil society statements. The Helsinki Plus 40 process should review the achievements and the violations that were observed since the 1975 Helsinki Final Act, note the general trends, make clear recommendations on further integrating human security into the overall agenda of the OSCE, and find more effective ways to ensure respect for states' human rights commitments, including follow-up on concrete human rights issue. That concludes my report. I would like now to perhaps open the report to some debate, and I welcome your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. Debate is on the draft resolution is now open. I must tell you that we have a list with 12 names, 12 speakers in script. I would like to remind the speakers to keep their remarks as brief as they can, and any more than 3-4 minutes, no longer, please. The first speaker is Mr. Fittis. I give you the floor, Mr. Fittis. From Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I wish to express the appreciation of the Cyprus delegation to the Turkish National Assembly for its kind invitation and hospitality. I also wish to congratulate our rapporteur, Mrs. Anne Phelan, for its very relevant and comprehensive report. The Helsinki Plus 40 presents the OSCE and this Assembly with the opportunity of an assessment of persisting challenges with regard to human rights and participating states' extent of adherence to OSCE human rights-related commitments. The principles of indivisibility, universality, and independence of human rights may or may not complement other fundamental principles, notably not interference of states' internal affairs, depending on different security perceptions. The greatest possible political consensus is therefore necessary in order to overcome persisting contentions which paralyze the OSCE towards a security community. These principles mean that all human rights carry equal weight. This becomes even more relevant in cases of human rights violations as a result of conflict situations within or between states. Regrettably, we are often witnessing policies of double standards dictated by the premise of might or right. Conflict situations have always been the main cause of increasing numbers of refugees, displaced persons, and asylum seekers worldwide. According to the United Nations 2011 report on the state of world refugees, published before the escalation of the crisis in Syria and the Sahel region, displaced persons reached 26 million and refugees 16 million, of whom 80% are in the developing world. Other causes, essentially pertaining to economic and environmental factors, as well as the connection with migration, particularly forced migration, add to the complexity of the situation. Vulnerable groups, such as children, women, and the elderly, are particularly affected by this dire reality. Children are the main victims of despicable atrocities in Syria, according to the UN Committee of Inquiry. Cyprus, being my country, being a neighboring state and suffering for almost 40 years now, flagrant violations of the fundamental human rights and freedoms of 1/3 of its population as a result of military aggression and continuing occupation of part of its territory, shares the feelings of agony and distress of innocent civilians, and is prepared to assist to the extent possible in evaluation efforts from hotbeds as it did during the crisis in Lebanon. Human rights education. The United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training constitutes a valuable tool that the OSCE must use in the context of its field missions and beyond to all stages of the conflict cycle. Freedom of expression and the media constitute a controversial matter in the OSCE area, subject to divergent security perceptions and to cross-violation. It is imperative that the fundamental human rights be respected and that journalists' unimpeded exercise of their duties be safeguarded. At the same time, journalists' second and healthy interaction with the political system appears to be necessary as against favoritism and corruption. Regarding Cyprus, at the initiative of a former MP and OSCE member, Mr. Christos Stylianidis, a special subcommittee has been created within the Cyprus Parliament Committee on Internal Affairs in order to examine best practices towards a healthier mass media environment. Last but not least, greater transparency and accountability are crucial in efforts to combat corruption and restore citizens' trust in the political system and state institutions, especially in the light of economic crisis and recession.
You must finish.
Thank you very much.
And now, Mrs. Aslanova from Azerbaijan. I give you the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Я Асланова. Так, уважаемые коллеги, хотелось бы поблагодарить докладчика за проделанную работу. Процесс Хельсинки-40 – это призыв к диалогу, к сотрудничеству и взаимопониманию, и также объективному отношению ко всем процессам, происходящим в пространстве ОБСЕ. Доклад, естественно, охватывает широкий круг вопросов. Однако у азербайджанской делегации есть несколько замечаний, и очень хотелось бы услышать ответ докладчика на поставленные нами вопросы. Первое. Поощрение свободы средств массовой информации. В данном разделе говорится, что положение в Азербайджане вызывает озабоченность. Отвечаю словами господина Барозу, председателя Еврокомиссии, объективность которого не вызывает ни у кого сомнения. Азербайджан в последнее время добился очень существенного прогресса в развитии гражданского общества, и мы должны признать огромный прогресс. Уважаемые коллеги, Азербайджан – демократическая страна, и которая осуществляет политические и экономические реформы, тесно сотрудничает со многими международными организациями. В Азербайджане число пользователей интернета превышает 70% населения страны. Нет цензуры, свободно действуют интернет-страницы. За последние 3 года Азербайджан стабильно сохраняет лидерство среди стран СНГ по уровню проникновения интернета. В 2012 году в стране с 9 миллионов населения 3 миллиона 680 человек пользователей интернета. Где логика? Какое правительство, с одной стороны, будет душить свободу слова, а с другой развивать интернет и делать его общедоступным? Описывая процессы в Азербайджане, вы взяли за основу данные Freedom House, где непрофессионально описаны процессы в Азербайджане. Уважаемые коллеги, политическая оценка процессов – дело крайне серьезное, и докладчик мог бы использовать данные более авторитетных, объективных организаций и, сравнивая, сопоставляя данные, прийти к объективному описанию событий, а также проблема с политзаключенными. Проблема осуждения главного редактора газеты «Хурал», где в докладе уделяется особое место, не связано с его политическими убеждениями, а связано именно с взятничеством в крупных размерах и так далее. И мы считаем, что никто из членов общества, в том числе журналисты, не является исключением, и все равны перед законом. И вы согласитесь с тем, что в любой демократической стране одним из конституционных обязанностей каждого гражданина, невзирая на его политическую и религиозную принадлежность, является соблюдение общепринятых законов и общечеловеческих норм поведения. По другим вопросам у нас также есть определенные замечания, вопросы, и я надеюсь, в течение обсуждения мы еще не раз вернемся к данной проблеме. Большое спасибо.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Gluzik from Poland.
Dear colleagues, last week I met two 16-year-old boys from Afghanistan in Warsaw. They have recently graduated secondary school, having arrived in Poland 3 years ago. They did not enter Poland under official refugee status, but rather via an extremely dangerous and traumatic journey from their country to ours without their parents, which included traveling under a bus. Speaking with these boys, two questions came into my mind. Why and how many more? Why did these two young boys have to risk their life traveling across many borders to finally reach safely? How many more children face similar situation, thus not only from Afghanistan, but Syria, Somalia, and Central Africa, every day in each of our countries? As members of OSCE, the responsibility falls on us to protect these people, and we have all seen the burden which is carried by the member states. But focusing on Afghanistan, we can see that there are several key factors which influence the current crisis. The upcoming election in 2014, combined with the withdrawal of coalition forces, is creating insecurity across the nation, as different groups, official and unofficial, try to exploit the sense of insecurity for their own advantage, as in the children fulfill the greatest impact. UNICEF has just announced that there has been a 27% increase in child casualties in the first quarter of 2013. Three weeks ago, Reuters reported the murder and beheading of two children, aged 10 and 16 years old, by a radical Islamist group in southern Afghanistan. In this year, the tragic news from Syria has dominated our thoughts and efforts, but we must not make the mistake of abandoning Afghanistan at this most critical hour. As the policy discussions take place throughout this year about the future of the country, we must make sure that we, member states of OSCE, become even more engaged to securing place, justice, and the protection of those who are the key to the nation's futures, the children. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Mrs. Anna Pavlovska-Daneva from former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Mrs. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning I would like to congratulate Ms. Anne Fallon for the excellent report and the proposed draft resolution, as well as to thank our host, the Turkish delegation to the OSCE, for their particular warm welcome and the exceptional organization of this annual session. Dear colleagues, in the report that we are discussing today, Mrs. Fallon rightly points out the closing statement of 2012 Ministerial Council, which states that respect for basic human rights and fundamental freedoms is currently under great threat in many parts in the OSCE region. I would like to bring to your notice the disturbing events that took place in the Assembly of the Republic of Macedonia on 24 December 2012, constituting an unprecedented attack on the constitutional order and the principles of the rule of law and democracy. Contrary to the Constitution, rule of procedure and laws, and bypassing the debate in the relevant committees, the President of the Assembly of the Republic of Macedonia tried to place the parliamentarians' approval of the 2013 budget directly on the plenary session, while the MPs representing the opposition parties were deprived from their voting cards. The parliamentarians from the opposition tried to block the beginning of the plenary session, after which they were brutally evicted from the plenary hall. The representatives of the people, both male and female, including one pregnant parliamentarian, were brutally attacked, pushed, and dragged outside the plenary hall by more than 40 security officers, some of them in plainclothes and not belonging to the parliament security. Previously, the journalists following the work of the Assembly were forcibly expelled from the gallery room in order not to witness the removal of the opposition MPs from the session. The MPs representing the government parties adopted 2013 budget in minutes after the opposition MPs and journalists were forced to leave. A commission investigating the December 24th events has been set up now in Macedonia, and it is chaired by a domestic expert, the Dean of the Law Faculty. We expect the Commission to be efficient and to produce conclusions over the disputed events by the end of July. This is the foundation for normalization of the political dialogue in Macedonia and an incentive to the country's Euro-integration process. I am calling to your attention to this issue in order to prevent such events undermining the democracy and rule of law, as well as violating the freedom of expression and media from ever happening again in the Republic of Macedonia, as well or elsewhere in the OSCE region. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mr. Kuglu from Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak about Gezi Park event in Turkey. The protests at Gezi Park were a spontaneous manifestation of discontent with the government's domestic and foreign policies. The population staged a civic uprising to say that enough is enough. The demonstrators gathered of their own will and initiative and had no connection to any foreign influence. This is an organic movement initiated by environmentalists and picked up by the masses that are fed up with the constant impositions of the ruling party AKP government. The young generation of Turkey inaugurated at Gezi Park a new era of hope and inspiration for the future of Turkish democracy, for fundamental rights and freedoms, and for the dignity of every individual human being. As a member of Republican People's Party, CHP, which is the main opposition party, I share their demands and vision for better Turkey. My party has no control over the demonstrators. There are certainly members of our movement who demonstrate in their capacity as private citizens, as I did myself, but not to our knowledge, nor under the CHP banner. The same applies to other parties too. Many protesters have no party affiliation but are associated with organizations with professional and intellectual affinities, such as unions, trade associations, universities. It's a movement which brings together the youngest and the oldest at the same square, which we can call it's a movement over the generations. It's a movement which brings together women and men shoulder to shoulder, so we can call it's a movement over gender issues. It's a movement which brings together the poorest and the richest, so we can call it's a movement over an economical classes. It is a movement which brings together atheists and the religious at the same frame, so we can call it's a movement over religions. It's a movement which brings together marginal and classical characters next to each other, so we can call it's a movement over human characters. It's a movement which brings together all citizens, from the one on the street and the celebrity, hand to hand, so we can call it's a movement has no arrogance. It's a movement which brings together all party and association members, from nationalists to communists, from rightists to leftists, on the streets, so we can call it's a movement over ideologies. It's a movement which brings together Fenerbahçe, Galatasaray, and Beşiktaş fans, so we can call it's a movement over competitions. There were demonstrators praying, while others building human circle around them to provide a peaceful and safe area until their prayers were over. This example alone is a testimony to the heterogeneity of the demonstrating crowds. So, Occupy Gezi Park movement is a cry for freedom and liberties by the people, regardless of their political denominations. Government violence started when? On the first morning of the demonstrations, police ambushed the peaceful demonstrators in their sleep, 5 a.m. in the morning, while they were asleep in their tents with tear gas and water cannons. According to police data, 4 demonstrators and 1 police officer lost their lives. 11 people lost one of their eyes by shot of a tear gas capsule. Countless of people were heavily injured and thousands of people poisoned by the gas used. More than 200,000 tear gas capsules were fired and more than 3,000 tons of water used by water cannons. Recent survey by Conduct Company revealed that the reason of the demonstrators to participate is as follows. 34% for freedoms, 18% for demanding rights, 9.5% against dictatorship and oppression, 8% for democracy. Gezi Park is a symbol of a new political dynamic in our country, which says to the ruling party, either you change and respect democracy and human rights, or we will continue. But the government uses repressive totalitarian methods. If they do so and take wrong steps, I'm afraid that everyone in our country will pay a high price. I'm very concerned, and I believe we should do everything to restore calm, while at the same time on the Turkish government to act in consonance with democratic norms of behavior in a state of law. However, the Turkish model imposed by this government is not viable. We repeatedly stress that Turkey is indeed a model for the region with the democracy and secular state. Through Occupy Gezi, the people of Turkey have shown their devotion to Atatürk's ideology and revolutions made and their desire for a truly democratic and pluralistic state. I once again salute all the peaceful demonstrators across the country. I hope to meet you all next time in Turkey, where free speech, human rights, and freedom is secured unconditionally for all citizens. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Mr. Valiev from Azerbaijan.
Госпожа председатель, в связи с отсутствием коллеги, мне хотелось бы озвучить мнение и позицию азербайджанской делегации. Уважаемые коллеги, мне бы хотелось остановиться на докладе на разделе «Мандаты полевых присутствий». В вышеупомянутом докладе, касаясь полевых миссий ОБСЕ, в некоторых странах СНГ указывается, что в 2019 году долгосрочные мандаты, включающие задачу мониторинга и представления докладов о деятельности на всех направлениях, включая права человека и человеческие измерения, были продлены до декабря 2013 года. Помимо того, выражается сожаление о том, что одностороннее решение Постоянного Совета не отвечает долгосрочным потребностям нынешних миссий, хотя на протяжении всего времени неэффективная деятельность этих миссий была налицо. В итоге решение ряда постсоветских стран, в том числе и Азербайджана, об установлении нового статуса местных офисов ОБСЕ и предложение об их преобразовании почему-то вызвало необоснованное негодование. Старание сохранить статус миссий в Беларуси и Грузии в докладе хладнокровно констатируется как провал попыток прийти к согласию. Снижение статуса полевых миссий ОБСЕ в Украине и в Узбекистане до уровня координатора проектов тоже было воспринимается со спокойствием. Однако инициатива Азербайджана начать дискуссии по изменению статуса представительств для увеличения эффективности их деятельности стал широко обсуждаться в стенах ОБСЕ. Якобы это вполне нормальная техническая процедура, создает плохой прецедент с точки зрения обязательств стран перед ОБСЕ. Азербайджан не ставит перед собой цель о приостановлении или же снижении взаимоотношений с ОБСЕ. Азербайджан всегда подчеркивал, что деятельность офиса ОБСЕ играла роль в демократизации страны и поддержке гражданского общества. Однако в стране за время деятельности офиса были созданы все основные институты гражданского общества, сформированы эффективные механизмы поддержки этих институтов. Наша страна намерена и в дальнейшем продолжить сотрудничество с этой организацией. Решение Азербайджана об изменении мандата бакинского офиса до уровня координатора проектов имеет юридическую, а не политическую основу и связано с деятельностью ОБСЕ в целом. Несмотря на то, что подобный статус уже имеется в ряде соседних стран, в ОБСЕ почему-то предпочитают об этом умалчивать. Хотя Азербайджан имеет полное право придерживаться своей позиции, как и другие члены ОБСЕ, принимающие аналогичные решения. В итоге неадекватное отношение в ОБСЕ к решению нашей страны вызывает чувство сожаления. Этим шагом Баку абсолютно не ограничивает действия представителей ОБСЕ в Азербайджане. Как и раньше, на предстоящих президентских выборах будут приглашены группы наблюдателей со стороны этой организации, и им будет созданы все благоприятные условия для эффективной работы. Если осталось время, несколько предложений и о беженцах и перемещенных лицах. Я благодарю госпожу докладчицу за то, что она обратила особое внимание на проблемы беженцев и перемещенные лица, но хотелось бы отметить слабую и даже некорректную позицию доклада в отношении беженцев и перемещенных лиц. Как известно, Организация Объединенных Наций под термином «беженец» подразумевает лицо, которое в силу вполне обоснованных опасений стать жертвой преследования по признаку расы, вероисповедания, гражданства, принадлежности к определенной социальной группе или политических убеждений находится вне страны своей гражданской принадлежности и не может пользоваться защитой этой страны. Военные конфликты ежегодно приумножают данную статистику, но разделение людей с одинаковыми трагическими судьбами на статус беженцев и перемещенных лиц не соответствует ни юридическим нормам, ни моральным принципам. Все они под угрозой смерти были вынуждены покинуть обжитые земли и были лишены всех элементарных прав человека. По данным Верховного комиссариата ООН... По данным Верховного комиссариата ООН по делам беженцев, на конец 2019 года Азербайджан включен в список стран, где проживают беженцы и вынужденные переселенцы в количестве от 400 тысяч до 2 миллионов человек. В данный момент только общее число вынужденных переселенцев составляет 600 тысяч человек. Сильное негодование вызывает и очередной факт применения двойных стандартов по отношению к нашей стране, так как в предложенном докладе указывается, что в 2010 году Осло, парламентская ассамблея ОБСЕ, приняла резолюцию о праве перемещенных лиц и беженцев в Грузии на возвращение на свои места. Мы приветствуем этот момент, но почему-то о бедственном положении азербайджанских беженцев и перемещенных лиц не говорится ничего. Мне кажется, это и есть двойной стандарт. И в заключение азербайджанская сторона выражает свое крайнее недовольство в отношении текста вышеупомянутого доклада и считает его несоответствующим принципам ОБСЕ.
Ms. Vienne from Belgium, you have the floor now.
Merci Madame la Présidente et merci pour la qualité de ce texte. Je voudrais simplement souligner quelques points qui me tiennent à cœur. Le premier en ce qui concerne la traite des êtres humains. Rappeler ce que l'on oublie souvent, c'est que en la matière, nous avons devant nous un secteur, entre guillemets, dans lequel il faut peu d'investissement pour un très gros rapport financier. C'est plus rentable que le trafic d'armes, plus rentable que le trafic de drogue. Et donc, c'est extrêmement difficile de lutter contre ce phénomène qui va en s'amplifiant. Et les mesures qui sont prises sont d'une relative efficacité. Elles peuvent être renforcées, mais au moins elles ont le mérite d'exister. Je voudrais souligner, bien sûr, la coopération policière internationale au sein des pays de l'OCDE, les poursuites judiciaires internationales. Et aussi un domaine dont on parle peu, c'est la confiscation des biens acquis par le trafic. Je pense que dès l'instant où l'on met en place, comme on l'a fait dans certains pays pour la lutte anti-mafia, des procédures de confiscation des biens, on a une chance d'être un peu plus efficace encore qu'on ne l'est. Il me semble important aussi de souligner une politique de retour. Très souvent, les victimes, lorsqu'elles rentrent dans leur village, dans leur pays, sont très mal accueillies, elles ne retrouvent pas d'emploi, elles ont du mal à se réinsérer dans le tissu social. Et donc, je voudrais vraiment insister sur une politique de retour qui pourrait être à la fois faire l'objet d'accords internationaux ou bilatéraux. Dans un autre domaine, celui de la liberté de conviction, je voudrais tout de même aussi rappeler que parallèlement à cela, il y a la séparation des églises et de l'État et que la laïcité doit aussi pouvoir s'exprimer dans l'espace social. Je dois dire que je suis inquiète de voir à quel point Aujourd'hui, dans l'espace public, dans les matières publiques, les églises interviennent. Je pense notamment en matière de droits des femmes, particulièrement à l'avortement, en matière de droits aussi des personnes homosexuelles, et que ce soit dans les pays de l'Union européenne ou hors Union européenne, on constate que les débats de société qui concernent les personnes homosexuelles sont systématiquement pénétrés du fait religieux. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you, Mr. Baltabayev from Kyrgyzstan.
Здравствуйте, дорогие коллеги. Позвольте поблагодарить госпожу Энн Филан за подготовку очень актуального проекта резолюции и за проделанный большой труд. Очень важно отметить, что, к большому сожалению, торговля людьми была и остается одной из продолжающихся комплексных проблем, от которой не застрахованы очень многие люди по всему миру, особенно в странах с высокой безработицей. Несмотря на то, что данная проблема обращается большое внимание со стороны международного сообщества и отдельных стран, торговля людьми остается актуальной проблемой, так как этот нелегальный бизнес приносит владельцам легкие и крупные деньги за счет жертв. Торговля людьми является самой жесткой формой нарушения прав человека. И к этой проблеме мы, парламентарии, должны относиться с большой ответственностью. Пользуясь случаем, призываю в рамках данного проекта резолюции стран-участниц ОБСЕ и других международных организаций, средств массовой информации, гражданское общество проводить на постоянной основе просветительские мероприятия по вопросам торговли людьми. Как не попадаться в руки преступников, создать горячую линию, куда граждане могут обращаться по интересующим ими вопросам, получить консультацию и помощь, а также пересмотреть действующее законодательство с тем, чтобы обеспечить согласованность и соответствие внутреннего законодательства с международными конвенциями о правах человека и создать отдел или комитеты в рамках национального парламента, чтобы контролировать органы по борьбе с торговлей людьми и повышать их эффективность. Согласно ООН, торговля людьми представляет собой преступную деятельность, посягающую на достоинство человека и негативно влияющую на развитие, мир, безопасность и права человека. Пользуясь нашим мандатом Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ и в родных странах, я призываю всех делегатов сделать все необходимое, чтобы предотвратить единственную форму рабства, которая все еще существует. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. Mrs. von Kramon from Germany, you have the floor.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Vielen Dank auch von meiner Seite an die Berichterstatterin für diesen guten und, wie ich finde, sehr fundierten Bericht und eben auch die Beschlussvorlage. Ich denke, wenn wir den Bericht lesen, merken wir, dass es wichtiger denn je ist, sich mit den Themen, die in unserem Ausschuss behandelt werden sollen, nämlich die Menschenrechte, die Demokratie, die humanitären Fragen, dass wir diese wirklich ernst nehmen und ausführlich diskutieren. Ich finde, der Bericht hat den Vorteil, und das möchte ich ganz besonders betonen, auch im Gegensatz zu meinen Vorrednerinnen aus Aserbaidschan, dass sie den Blick auf die Defizite und die Probleme lenken, die in vielen der OSZE-Länder noch herrschen. Ich finde es auch wichtig, dass insbesondere die Arbeit der Beauftragten für die Medienfreiheit der OSZE, Frau Mijatovic, besonders ins Visier genommen wurde und gelobt wurde. Denn es ist wirklich wichtig, dass wir Voraussetzungen schaffen, damit Journalisten in unseren Mitgliedsländern frei arbeiten können. Und wir haben gesehen, wir haben es heute gelesen, wir haben es in Wien bei der letzten Anhörung gehört, dass das leider nicht immer der Fall ist und dass es in einigen Ländern immer schwieriger wird. Ich möchte hier insbesondere die Länder Aserbaidschan rausgreifen, aber auch Kasachstan. Und ich möchte auch betonen, dass wir uns wirklich zunehmend um die Rolle der Zivilgesellschaft kümmern müssen. Aber die echte Zivilgesellschaft und nicht die Zivilgesellschaft, die von den Präsidenten als Zivilgesellschaft markiert wird. Also wir müssen eine unabhängige Zivilgesellschaft mit echten, unabhängigen Vereinen und Verbänden zulassen. Auch das ist eine Voraussetzung, die wir brauchen, wenn wir wirklich demokratische Strukturen langfristig in allen OSZE-Ländern etablieren wollen. Und genau deswegen muss ich sagen, habe ich es sehr bedauert, dass gestern im Ständigen Ausschuss die Entscheidung gefallen ist, zum Beispiel ein Land wie Kasachstan, in dem es an einigen oder anderen Stellen gerade nach der Niederschlagung des Aufstands in Janaozen nicht möglich war, über dieses Land etwas länger zu diskutieren. Ich finde, wir hatten dort einen sehr guten Beschlussvorschlag. Es hätte uns gut getan, in diesem Ausschuss insbesondere über Kasachstan und die Situation, die demokratischen Voraussetzungen, die rechtlichen Voraussetzungen in Kasachstan zu diskutieren. Und ich bedauere es sehr, dass das offensichtlich nicht die Mehrheit der Mitgliedstaaten hier gefunden hat. Und ich hoffe, dass wir vielleicht an anderer Stelle über die Frage Demokratie, Menschenrechte, Bürgerrechte, Zivilgesellschaft in Kasachstan, aber auch in Aserbaidschan hier noch mal sprechen können. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Lord Dubs from United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get to the heart of the matter, could I just say, looking at the platform, what a pleasant change it is to see 5 women and one man, compared to compared to the row of men and one woman that we saw yesterday. So well done. Maybe it's a taste of things to come. Could I congratulate Anne Phelan both on the report and on the comments she made in introducing her debate? May I just very briefly say one or two things about people trafficking? I know other people have also mentioned it, but it is such an important issue. And I believe it is one on which every one of us has a responsibility, not just here at the OSCE, but when we go back to our own countries. Because although people are trafficked sometimes from outside the OSCE, we also know that there is trafficking from OSCE countries to other OSCE countries. And we have a responsibility, therefore, to deal with the issue, whether we're a receiving country or a sending country of these victims. I think it's important we should support NGOs who play a very important part in supporting people who've been trafficked, in helping them on their safe return if they go back to their own countries, in providing information and in pressing governments to take more action. Other speakers have already said, and I think it is also our responsibility, to make sure there is a lot of information in the public domain in our countries about people trafficking, because that way more attention is drawn to it, and the governments of our countries are more likely to take tough action to deal with traffickers. Finally, could I just say this? We've discovered, certainly in the UK and elsewhere, there is sometimes a problem, and we're trying to make sure the police are well trained and educated, that there's been a tendency in the past to treat a victim of trafficking not as a victim, but as a possible illegal immigrant. And it is crucially important that the authorities and the police and others are aware that if we treat trafficked women, not always women, but often they are, trafficked women as illegal immigrants, then they will not present themselves to the authorities, and we can't tackle the criminals who are dealing in trafficking. So that's another reason why there should be information and good training for police and other people in responsible positions so that they can be aware of it. But let me finish again by saying I know Anne Phelan has done a lot of good work in Ireland and elsewhere on people trafficking, and I do congratulate her on what is an excellent report.
Thank you. Mr. Azopardi from Malta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, in the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE participating states committed themselves to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, and religion. In this context, I will focus my intervention on religious discrimination. I am convinced that every religion seeks to promote peace, understanding, and justice. Peace and justice are the basis for good international relations. Only these can promote international security and stability. It is of vital importance to understand that freedom of religion and freedom of ideas are meaningless without the freedom of expression. Try to imagine what will be left of the freedom of religion if you are not entitled to express your faith. In other words, freedom of expression is the precondition for the freedom of religion. This should be a prerequisite in the legislation of all countries within the OSCE region. This could be a guiding rule in all countries where Christianity is not always tolerated or even permitted. In other words, religion is sometimes used as a valid reason for war and terrorism. When it is used as such, this is not religion but pseudo-religion, and those who promote such deeds would be making mock of their own kin's religious principles. Intercultural and interreligious dialogue promotes understanding of basic values of different cultures and religions. These are the basic common values of mankind, and all members of all religions should be made aware of such common value inherent in all and independently from one's personal beliefs. Interreligious dialogue, interreligious social contacts, especially in voluntary work, help promote understanding and tolerance between people of different races and different religions. Moreover, religious leaders should curb fanaticism based on religious grounds. We, as parliamentarians within the OSCE, should unite and embark on a bridge-building project between culture and religion. Only through mutual respect and understanding we can build a better world. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now Mr. Chikail from Morocco. And we have 3 more speakers, and we need to start with the amendments. Please, no longer than 3 minutes. Please.
Bonjour. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de remercier le gouvernement turc, aussi son peuple, pour son hospitalité, pour la réception qu'ils nous ont organisée hier soir, aussi bien au point de vue organisation que gastronomique que musical. Merci au peuple et au gouvernement turc. Madame la Présidente, hier, il a été dit quelque chose de bien dans cette salle, c'est qu'il n'y a pas mieux que la démocratie. Oui, il n'y a pas mieux que la démocratie, surtout quand il est encouragé. Et surtout quand il est appliqué. Nous constatons que les pays comme le nôtre, qui appréhendent la démocratie, le droit de l'homme, le droit à la femme, le droit à l'enfant, le respect à l'individu, de professer sa religion, ne sont pas souvent encouragés, mais plutôt critiqués. Madame la Présidente, les parlementaires ici, que ce soit du Maroc ou des autres pays, nous transportons toutes les recommandations de l'OSCE, toutes les discussions qui se déroulent aussi bien dans les plénières que dans les commissions à nos pays. Nous les discutons dans nos parlementaires. Nous essayons d'appliquer même par nos textes législatifs les recommandations de l'OSCE. bien sûr, et notamment les points nobles, comme ceux que j'ai dit, la démocratie, le droit de l'homme, le droit de l'enfant, et aussi l'environnement, ce point important pour lequel le Parlement marocain, la semaine dernière, lui a consacré une séance d'interprétation au chef de son gouvernement. Notre gouvernement lui a réservé l'importance qu'elle mérite. Tout ce travail, nous le faisons, nous l'appliquons. Ne l'appliquons pas comme de bons élèves, nous l'appliquons comme des vrais partenaires, alors que nous sommes toujours ici considérés comme des observateurs. Nous espérons que le bureau prochain, que toute cette Assemblée considère notre position et nous donne notre droit. Nous faisons tout ce qui est dans notre possibilité pour que la démocratie se répande dans le monde entier. Nous l'appliquons, malgré nos difficultés dans nos pays économiques d'alphabétisation. Nous l'appliquons. Mais nous voulons aussi que l'organisation de l'OSCE, auquel nous appartenons, nous encourage. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you. Mr. Senko from Belarus, you have the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Прежде всего, я хотел бы сделать несколько общих замечаний, касающихся содержания как доклада, так и в основном предлагаемой нашему комитету резолюции. Наша делегация считает, что резолюция не является документом сбалансированным. Проект содержит явные перекосы и не охватывает важные моменты, значимые в контексте процесса Хельсинки +40, которому посвящена сессия нашей Ассамблеи. В представленном виде, по нашему убеждению, резолюция не отражает мнение всех парламентских делегаций. И в этой связи мы будем предлагать целый ряд поправок, которые могли бы исправить резолюцию, хотя бы лучшим вариантом было бы, видимо, ее глубоко переработать. Вот некоторые из наиболее важных моментов, по нашему мнению. Мы считаем, что одобрение односторонних мер принуждения, я имею в виду московский механизм, явно не соответствует духу Хельсинки +40, идее укрепления и комплексного обновления ОБСЕ, построение единого и неделимого сообщества безопасности, основанного на согласованных принципах, совместных обязательствах и общих целях. Мы считаем, что деятельность ОБСЕ в рамках человеческого измерения должна неукоснительно основываться на принципах суверенного равенства государств-участников, закрепленных в Хельсинкском акте 1975 года. Сложно назвать конструктивным включение в проект резолюции пунктов, затрагивающих проблематику политических заключенных, что не будет способствовать сближению подходов государств-участников ОБСЕ. Такой же эффект производят и призывы к учреждению полевых присутствий организаций там, где для этого сегодня уже нет явных весомых оснований, либо мандаты этих миссий давно выполнены. По нашему убеждению, стоило бы также уделить больше внимания вопросам координации международных усилий в области противодействия торговле людьми, выполнения государственными участниками ОБСЕ своих обязательств в области свободы перемещения и ряду других вопросов. Спасибо.
Thank you. Mr. Ayalan from Turkey.
Teşekkürler Sayın Başkan. Bildiğiniz gibi Türkiye 27 Mayıs'ta başlayan ve maalesef istenmeyen toplumsal olaylara sahne oldu. Mayıs ayındaki protestolar çevreci hassasiyetlere sahip kişiler tarafından barışçıl ve çevreci bir hareket olarak başlatıldı. Fakat eylemler çok kısa zamanda şekil değiştirdi. Şiddet yanlısı, aşırı uç ve marjinal gruplar tarafından amacından saptırıldı. Hükümete ve Sayın Erdoğan'ın şahsına yönelik hakaretlerle dolu, kamu ve özel mallara zarar veren bir eylem haline dönüştü. Hiçbir demokratik hükümet bu tip hukuksuz ve gayrimeşru eylemlere müsaade edemez. Güvenlik güçlerimiz kanunların verdiği yetkiler ve uluslararası hukuk kuralları çerçevesinde gerekli gördükleri müdahaleleri yaptı. Bu süreçte polisin aşırı güç kullandığına dair şikayetler alındı. Bu şikayetler özenle araştırıldı ve sorumlular hakkında gerekli işlemler yapılıyor. Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı, Başbakan ve hükümet üyeleri de bu yönde açıklamalar yaptılar ve bu münferit olayların araştırıldığı herkes tarafından zaten biliniyor. Sosyal medyada yapılan haberler, yayan ve halkı provoke eden ve belli merkezlerden üretilen projeler çerçevesinde davranan kişiler, Türkiye'de ve dünyada gezi olayları diye bilinen olayların olduğundan daha vahimmiş gibi göstermeye özen gösterdi. Gerçek ilgisi olmayan, aslı astarı olmayan bu haberler, halkta polisin eylemcilere karşı şiddet uyguladığı izlenimini yaratmaya yönelikti. Bunlar olayları bir miktar daha alevlendirdi. Uluslararası medya bu tip bazı haberleri doğruluklarını araştırmadan servis etti ve dünya nezdinde Türkiye'nin ve hükümetin imajını lekelemeye çalıştı. Hatta öyle ki uluslararası bir televizyon kanalı İstanbul'da 100 binlerin toplandığı bir mitingi, Erdoğan'a destek mitingini Erdoğan karşıtı olarak vermekten çekinmedi. Burada ulusal ve yabancı basına düşen sorumluluk, sosyal medya kaynaklı haberleri gazetecilik ciddiyeti ve sorumluluğuyla incelemek ve doğruluğunu teyit etmeden yayınlanmamaktır. Sayın Başkan, değerli meslektaşlar, Türkiye, Kopenhag kriterlerini sağlamış, Avrupa Birliği ile müzakere eden demokratik bir hukuk devletidir. Bu tip eylemlerin ülkemizde yapılabilmesi son 10 yılda demokrasi alanındaki büyük atılımlar sayesindedir. Herkes, bu grubun üyeleri de bilirler ki AK Parti iktidarı öncesinde geçtiğimiz ayda yapılan eylemlerin ülkemizde yapılabilmesi mümkün değildi. Sayın Erdoğan ve bazı hükümet üyeleri bu sorunu demokratik bir yöntemle çözebilmek için çok gayret göstermişlerdir. Hatta öyle ki eylemcilerin neredeyse tamamıyla ve temsilcileriyle defalarca görüştüler ve Gezi Parkı alanında yapılması öngörülen düzenlemeler için İstanbul sakinlerinin tamamının katılacağı bir plebiscit yapılmasını önerdiler. Fakat bu demokratik çözüm önerileri eylemcilerin bir kısmı tarafından, marjinal gruplar ve şiddet eğilimler tarafından kabul görmedi. Yine hükümet üyeleri defalarca ortada Gezi Parkı'nın alışveriş merkezi haline dönüştürülemeyeceğini ve böyle bir planın olmadığını değişik platformlarda söylemiş olmalarına rağmen protestocuların bir kısmı bu beyanatları görmezden geldiler ve hukuksuz eylemlerini yapmaya devam ettiler. Öte yandan Avrupa İnsan Hakları Sözleşmesi'nde tanımlanan gösteri hakkının limitlerine ve etkilerinin kamu güvenliği ve diğer kişilerin güvenliğini sağlama konusundaki sorumluluğuna da dikkatlerinizi çekmek istiyorum. Elbette Türkiye serbest seçimlerin yapıldığı, herkesin halkın iradesiyle iktidara geldiği ve demokratik bir hukuk devleti olduğunu unutmaması gerekiyor. Şiddeti seçenlerin bağımsız yargı önüne çıkarılması ve şiddetin önlenmesi hukuk devletine düşen bir görevdir. Bu çerçevede uluslararası toplumun demokratik değerlere ve tüm vatandaşların demokratik haklarının korunmasına öncelik verilmesi gerektiğine dikkat çekerek Türkiye'de yaşananları nesnel bir bakışla yorumlaması, şiddetin ve aşırılıkların önlenmesi için çalışması gerektiğini dikkatlerinize sunmak istiyorum. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you, Mr. Smith from USA.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank our rapporteur, Ann Phelan, for her report, especially the emphasis on combating human trafficking. As I think many of you know, I authored the first supplemental item on combating human trafficking back in 1999 at our Parliamentary Assembly in St. Petersburg, and actually wrote the United States law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We have made collectively some very serious progress. Much more remains to be done, but since 2008, Over 54,000 victims have been identified within the OSCE space, and over 11,500 convictions of traffickers. And in 2012 alone, 3 more countries did substantial or new changes to their law with regards to combating trafficking. But I do have a very serious question for our distinguished rapporteur. For over 40 years, I have worked to protect unborn children and their mothers from the violence of abortion. In the preamble of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, it makes very clear that the child before birth deserves special safeguards, in other words, special protections. Your report wisely underscores the importance of conscience rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As you point out, everyone has the right to conscience, with an emphasis on everyone. This week, the Taoiseach, Kenny, Prime Minister of Ireland, of course, is refusing to allow members of his political party fundamental conscience rights to vote against a pro-abortion piece of legislation. And I would respectfully submit, no matter where you stand on the pending legislation, doesn't Article 18 of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has a right to freedom of conscience, apply to parliamentarians in your party, in any party, who want to vote no without coercion, without being told that they will be penalized or perhaps even rendered ineligible to run for parliament or for the Dáil again? Does everyone include parliamentarians? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now I close general debate, and I give the floor to Anne Felen to answer the speakers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I suppose if I could thank all the parliamentarians for their comments, and to thank everybody for their contributions. I suppose, as I can see around the floor, that even though we're all parliamentarians and we all, applaud the role of democracy, there are wide and diverse views across the floor, and this represents all that there is about democracy and parliamentarians, that we can actually come here together, and we do have differences of opinions, but we are still able to express those opinions. And that is what the OSCE is all about. So even here today, we are actually demonstrating what we want the OSCE to be about. I welcome the comments, and it's just to say that in some of the resolutions, some of the issues that have been raised will be dealt with and can be spoken about. There are resolutions on refugees, there are resolutions on human trafficking, there are resolutions on field missions, so we can deal with those there. Questioning issues is the role of parliamentarians. As I say, some of the resolutions can address these issues. I also said at the outset of my report that it was wide and was varying. The report is trying to deal with human issues. When we are trying to deal with human issues do not fit in neatly into a box. Human issues do not fit in neatly to the rule of law, but we have to strive to do our best. I think the report is highlighting some parts of the OSCE states where we have to make better contributions, where we have to get more positive outcomes. I think there is no disagreement in this room about that. This is the reason why we are here. This is the reason why 57 states are part of the OSCE organization. I think we do excellent good work here, but also, as I said at the outset, that this is the most vast and most diverse committee of the OSCE, and requires in some ways probably a lot of creative thinking, Resolution 24, 23, 18 and 16 will also deal with some of the issues that have been raised in the room. I will just reiterate about the role of the media and freedom of the media. The media have an extremely important role to play in holding government to account. When the media holds government to account, the public buy in to that. It gives the public a confidence in their governments as well. So it's a three-way triangle. You have government, you have the public, and you have journalism. I think the journalists do an extremely important role to try to manage, to try to arrange what the media produces is not in the interest of democracy, and I'll just leave it at that. It's just to say that in the report also, the report was from the was based on the findings of our rapporteur on freedom of the media. I think, oh yeah, the legislation, actually, I have to return to Ireland to vote on not abortion legislation. It's actually about saving lives. Our constitution in Ireland gives the same constitutional right to the mother and the life of the unborn. The legislation has come about. We have been 20 years trying to deal with this. I actually disagree that you say that the parliamentarians are being browbeaten into voting for this legislation. This is how we do our business in the Parliament in Ireland. We have the whip system, and this is how we do our business. You know, if we were to change the system every time we wanted to pass a law, we might never get any laws through. We've been doing this since the inception of the state, and it's how we do it. I am actually a pro-choice person myself, and I think that is a good way to be. I sometimes think that, and I'm actually on the record of the Dáil possibly saying that, you know, this is about women and this is about saving women's lives. And I think that's very important, because if a woman dies, her baby dies too. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Fallon. And thank you for excellent job. We will now move to consider the amendments submitted to the draft resolution. 51 amendments have been tabled, and copies of amendments have been made available. The correct version is entitled as AS 30, DRS 3 amend. Considering the number of amendments, I shall have to impose strict limits on speaking time. The proposers of the amendments or amendments, the proposal of the amend or amendments will speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. I shall then allow the same time to an opponent of the amendment, and I ask the sponsor of the draft resolution, Mrs. Anne Fallon, for her opinion. Following that, I shall put the amendment to the vote. I call now Mr. Fitis from Cyprus to propose Amendment 1.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Rationale of the First Amendment. We deem essential to focus on the alarming situation caused by the increasing number of people becoming refugees, internally displaced persons, and asylum seekers worldwide. This matter becomes even more complex as it cuts across migration in general and forced migration in particular. In connection with the second amendment that we propose in the operative part of the resolution, we wish to point to the responsibility lying with the international community to effectively deal with these complex challenges. It is important to note in this context that human rights abuses have always been the main cause of forced displacement, to which other intertwined negative factors have been added as described in the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to speak against Amendment 1? No? What are your opinions, Anne Fallon?
Yes, I am in favour of the amendment. They are very complex issues, but I believe that this is going to become a very large difficulty for the OSCE in the very, very near future. According to the UN's refugee agency, UNHCR, the number of people currently in situations of displacement has hit 45 million, the highest figure in 14 years, so I am in favour of the amendment.
Okay. Now I'm going to put the amendment to vote. Those in favour, raise your cards. Okay. Those against, okay. The amendment 1 is approved. It's adopted. I call now Mr. Guminski from Belarus to propose amendment 2.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Мы предлагаем в пункте 2 заменить выражение некоторых частях региона ОБСЕ на регион ОБСЕ. По нашему мнению, выделение отдельных регионов гипотетически открывает возможности для селективного выделения ситуации в одних странах и оставляя без внимания подобные ситуации в других. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anyone want to speak against Amendment 2? One person from Cyprus. United Kingdom also.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's my concern about the amendment is that I think the OSCE would be more effective if it focused on areas where more improvement could be done, rather than make a general assumption, so that we can focus our efforts and get better outcomes.
And Fallon, you have the floor.
I agree with our colleague from the United Kingdom. I am against this amendment. I think it's our duty as parliamentarians to focus on the areas where we have difficulties. I think to take out the word some changes the meaning of the paragraph, and I would recall the parliamentarians to the statement of the chairman, the Irish chairman, the closing statement, that we still have difficulties in some areas of the OSCE, so I'm against this amendment.
I put now the Amendment 2 to vote. Those who are in favour? Those who are against? Abstentions? The Amendment 2 is defeated. I call now Mr. Bishkova from Kazakhstan to propose the Amendment 3.
Спасибо, уважаемая госпожа председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, своей поправкой мы хотели подчеркнуть, что на последнем масштабном мероприятии в рамках ОБСЕ была подтверждена приверженность главным приоритетам в области человеческого измерения.
Thank you. And Helen?
Yes, I am in favour of this amendment. We agree the commitments should be fully implemented, and we commend Kazakhstan on an important OSCE summit in 2010. However, we've made these human dimension commitments and recommitments for several decades. Looking back to 1990 Copenhagen document, it's good that we reaffirm these commitments, but commitments must be reflected in concrete political will to improve the situation in the human dimension in all OSCE states. Convinced that the inherent dignity of the individual is at the core of comprehensive security, we reiterate that human rights and fundamental freedoms are inalienable, and that their protection and promotion is our first responsibility. I am in favour of this amendment.
Now I put this amendment to the vote. Those who are in favour? Those who are against? Abstentions? The amendment 3 is adopted. I call Mr. Guminsky from Belarus to propose amendment 4. Yes, Mr. Guminsky. Yes.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Мы предлагаем добавить следующий пункт после пункта 3, отмечая резолюцию Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ «Осуществление глобального плана действий Организации Объединенных Наций по борьбе с торговлей людьми», принятую на Белградской ежегодной сессии в 2011 году. В дополнение к приоритетам украинского председательства ОБСЕ на 2013 год по линии человеческого измерения мы считаем важным напомнить о резолюции по борьбе с торговлей людьми, единогласно принятой на Белградской сессии Парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Эта проблематика также является важной частью процесса Хельсинки плюс 40. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against this amendment? Amendment 4? No one? And Felon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I am in favour of this amendment. Indeed, this is a lot of what my report is about, and it calls on the OSCE participating states to address the demand that fuels trafficking in persons for all forms of exploitation, with a view to eliminating such demand, and to that end to enhance preventive measures, including legislative measures, to deter exploiters of trafficked persons and to ensure that they are held accountable. This indeed is a lot of what my report has been dedicated to, so I am in favour.
I put now the amendment 4 to the vote. Those who vote in favour, raise your cards. Those against? Abstentions? The amendment is adopted. I call now, I think it's not Mr. Gominsky because he left. He leave? It's Mr. Senko from Belarus to propose amendment 5.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Как и в каждой делегации, разделение труда – вещь естественная. Мы предлагаем пункт 4 снять, считая, что данная формулировка направлена на размывание межправительственного формата ОБСЕ. Наша организация остается именно межправительственной. Спасибо.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against this amendment? Anyone? Oh, okay, Germany.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich glaube, es ist ein sehr guter und ein sehr sinnvoller Vorschlag, der hier gemacht wurde von der Berichterstatterin, insbesondere die Zivilgesellschaft institutionell zu stärken, indem wir ihnen ein Board zuweisen. Und ich halte den Vorschlag für sehr gut und sehr ausgewogen und würde mich freuen, wenn der hier ausreichend Unterstützung fände und drin bleiben könnte.
And Fallon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I am against this amendment, and indeed, I think this has been echoed around the floor a number of times this morning. A vibrant civil society is a key element of any democratic society. We must find ways to cooperate more closely with NGOs and to ensure that their voice is also heard. The OSCE EPA must find more systematic ways to ensure that civil society has both a role and a voice in our National Assembly. Therefore, I would like to keep the original text, and it is a recommendation of my report. So I am against this amendment.
Now I put this amendment to vote. Those in favor? Amendment 5. Raise your cards.
Sorry, I was over anxious.
Those in favor? Okay. Those against? Okay. Abstentions? The amendment is defeated. And I call now again Mr. Senko, I think, from Belarus, to propose amendment 6.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Касательно пункта 5 я хотел предложить также эту позицию снять, поскольку целый ряд стран-участниц ОБСЕ, а это не только Беларусь, в частности Казахстан, Канада, Киргизстан, Монголия, Соединенные Штаты, Таджикистан, Туркменистан, Узбекистан и так далее, не входят в состав Совета Европы, а их парламенты также не являются членами Парламентской ассамблеи Совета Европы. Поэтому мы призываем поддержать эту поправку. Спасибо.
Does anyone wish to speak against? Germany.
Auch dieses ist aus unserer Sicht ein sehr guter Vorschlag. Wir haben in der Parlamentarischen Versammlung des Europarats sehr lange und sehr ausgiebig über mehrere Monate hinweg diese Definition der politischen Gefangenen diskutiert und haben am Ende trotz der Bedenken aus einigen Staaten, die natürlich auch Mitglied hier in der OSZE sind, das mehrheitlich abgestimmt. Und ich glaube, es ist ein guter Kompromiss. Und ich könnte mir gut vorstellen, dass das auch hier für diese Parlamentarische Versammlung eine vernünftige Grundlage wäre, um mit der Definition hier weiterarbeiten zu können.
Yes, you want to speak, but the rule is one person only. Please excuse me. Excuse me. I appeal to your comprehension. No, and Fallon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am against this amendment. as my colleague from Germany said, the process to define the term political prisoner has been ongoing at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council for Europe, PACE, for several years. I know this is very sensitive and is sometimes a very controversial issue. However, I think the definition and the work around it conducted by our colleagues at PACE is a highly commendable effort. I support this important political process in key international institutions like PACE and the OSCE. Therefore, I am against this proposed amendment to delete the paragraph.
I put Amendment 6 to the vote. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions? The amendment is defeated. And now, one time more, Mr. Senko, I think.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель, за терпение. Я не трактую с лингвистической точки зрения отклонение как defeated. Proposal is not defeated. Что касается следующего пункта 5, то мы предлагаем добавить следующий пункт после пункта 5. Ссылаясь на резолюции Парламентской ассамблеи о совершенствовании наблюдения за выборами в государствах-участниках ОБСЕ и свободе передвижения в регионе ОБСЕ, принятые на монакской ежегодной сессии в 2013 году. Предлагаем эту поправку поддержать. Спасибо.
Okay, does anyone wish to speak against? Amendment 7? No one? Okay, and Felon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's to say that I am very much in favour of this proposal. I think the proposal is to be much praised, and it is the essence of the OSCE, improving election observation in OSCE participating states and freedom of movement in the OSCE region. So I am in favour of this amendment.
I put now the Amendment 7 to the vote. Those in favor, raise your cards. Those against? Abstentions? The amendment is approved. I call Mr. Tseratelli from Georgia to propose Amendment 8.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and would like also to admit and congratulate Ms. Ann Fallon with the very important and useful work and resolution. So we'd like to add to this paragraph 6 and to strengthen this paragraph with the words of retribution on political opponents and selective justice in OSCE area. So, and we hope that our fellow parliamentarians will support that. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against? I don't see anyone. Okay. And Fallon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and it's to say that I am in favour of this amendment. This amendment broadens the context outlined in our 2012 Monaco Declaration to include issues like political revenge and selective justice. I think this is an important proposal on page 9 of the report. Speaks about access to justice. Justice is for all and is a fundamental human right, and therefore I am in favour of this amendment.
I put now the amendment 8 to the vote. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions? Okay, the amendment 8 is approved. And now it's 1:30. We must stop our work and we continue tomorrow at 11:30. Okay? Thank you. Bye-bye.